Welcome to the Chris Hall NDIS podcast. My name is Chris Hall, your host, and today I've got Lyndall Robertshaw on with me. And Lyndall is the CEO of Home in Place, which is a large housing provider. And today we're going to unpack some of the challenges that face people with disability that live in housing, that want to access the NDIS. We want to look at some of the collaboration opportunities at the industry and kind of policy level, and really unpack some of the key things that I feel exist in the sector. So, Lyndall, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on.
Morning, Chris, and thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. So, I guess barriers to access the NDIS is a key subject, right? So, we do that as a pro bono service at our organization when someone needs, help to access the NDIS. And I've got my perspective on what the barriers are, but I'd love to start off with from your point of view, from what you see day to day in the housing side of things, for your tenants, for your cohorts of people with disability, for those that don't have NDIS funding already, what do you see as the barriers to accessing the NDIS?
Yeah, look, I think one of the barriers is that there are a lot of people who don't know how to navigate the NDIS. And they don't know where to start. So this is particularly hard for people with a disability if they don't have supports to help them understand and go through that process. So the NDIS access pathway, as you would know, is not easily accessible. And the process can take, 6 to 12 months to get an outcome. Yeah. So gathering the sufficient evidence takes time and often comes at a cost to individuals who don't have the financial means to pay for the specialist reports. And there are also, the wait times for people to see psychologists and other health professionals to gain those specialist reports to support their applications. So to me, I see that as one of the biggest barriers. And, some of our staff have said, people often will apply once. They don't have the sufficient evidence, and then they receive a knockback and they don't try again unless they've got those strong supports in place. So, yes. And I think there's a lot of people who are unaware whether they would be eligible or not. I think personally, I know of someone who I believe would benefit from the NDIS. I think it would improve their life. I don't think they don't require SDA, but I think they would definitely benefit from some support. This person had a stroke when they were fairly young, have a range of mental health issues, and even the GP basically had said to this person that the process was too hard and the cost was significant to go through. So I just think, to me, they're the hurdles that I think people are facing. And I think it's the navigating the process. And as you can imagine, some of the people who require this, if they don't have family or friends or support in place or know how to navigate it, then how do they understand and go through it? To me, I think that's probably one of the biggest barriers. So there's probably a lot of people out there that are eligible and don't know that they would be, don't know how it could actually benefit them. And then those that don't know how to actually go through it.
I totally agree. And if we can contrast and compare, for example, you've got the local area coordinator, LAC model, and you've got support coordination, and this plan to go towards the navigator role, which we'll put to the side for a second. But even just compare LAC to a coordinator. A coordinator, when they're fully funded, they have 30 clients, 40 clients. When they're stretched thin, they're totally busy. They're already busy, but they're the type of people that have the skill set and the ability to pay attention to someone to get them through the process. But they've got a funding challenge and also a capacity challenge. LACs, great, but they'll have hundreds of cases that they need to manage. So the best that they can do, if I was to go like locally here on the Central Coast, you've got Social Futures as the LAC provider, but they'll be based in Gosford. You can go and have a meeting, and they'll tell you what to do. But again, it's that the disconnect is everything you said. It's that kind of you can have limiting beliefs and personal beliefs of like, oh, maybe I'm not. No one may not care enough about me to do this, or I don't know what to do. Am I good enough? Like there's almost like a limiting personal belief thing. But the evidence and the know-how in terms of the industry is so crucial. So, for example, real life story. I'm helping a guy that's had a very serious mental health diagnosis for 25 years and is legally blind. and he still doesn't have access, but I'm helping him do so. But it kind of almost necessary for me to jump in because I'm like, hey, let's go to dig out your records from the hospital system that exists 25 years ago because your GP doesn't have the original diagnosis. Let's grab that. For another lady, I'm helping her go to a psychologist and go, thank you for your letter, but can you please just redo that and reference the DSM-5, which is a diagnostic criteria? Like you've got to have all this little know-how in terms of evidential things, and how to sequence, the players that are involved, whether it be your GP or this or that. And yeah, there's that collaborative stakeholder, bring it all together person, that I feel like is necessary, and we're happy to do it because we see people that are in need of help, but that takes some time. And we went to the GP, did it, and the GP was like, "Oh my god, thank you! Like I wouldn't have had time to draft this application
Yeah.
form in the way that you've done it, so thank you." And I guess that's the point. It's the holding someone's hand on the journey, that metaphorically, that's what's necessary. You can't, in my opinion, achieve it just at the LAC office. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I agree. And I think, you're looking at people with disabilities, um, some don't have the capacity to understand what documents are required, etc. So I think there's a couple of steps. The first one is they don't know even how to ask. If they, some of these people are quite isolated too. We have to remember that some people live alone and don't have strong family and friend networks. So, and if GPs aren't actually advising, people to go down this road and get some help and get some supports, then, and they don't have family or friends, or even if they do and their family and friends are unaware, then that's the first hurdle, and then it's the path along there, and it's a long path, right? And I think that is probably a significant one. Well, they're both significant barriers.
they are. So then, again, for a real life story, I'm helping a lady on the NDIS side of things, and she's also had challenges with housing. So she applied for Homes New South Wales, right? So housing can be covered by organisations like yourself with Home in Place. It could be Homes New South Wales, depending on the state you're in. There's lots of different organisations you could apply for housing. When you look at not just Home in Place, but also the broader sector, from your point of view, what are the typical wait times? Just if you're a new applicant for housing.
Yeah, so that depends on the location,
Yeah.
and obviously also the need. So, in New South Wales, you can be allocated a wait time. It could be under 2 years, 2 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years, or over 10 years. And then there's also priority applicants. So for those priority applicants, they are very, very high need. So, obviously then they're housed above the general housing wait list, which is in those wait times. So every time there's more and more priority applicants added to the wait list, the other people on the wait list have, are pushed back in turn. So it's the assessments are done annually, or when a circumstance changes. And this is important for people to understand on the wait list as well, is that if they have a change, that creates a higher need for housing, then they should go back to their local community housing provider or Homes New South Wales and provide that information and update that information. So potentially they may move up on that wait list. The good thing in New South Wales they done years ago, there's a thing, it's a common wait list called pathways. So there's no wrong door basically. So the wait list that an applicant has, if they go and make an application in Home in Place or with Homes New South Wales or another community housing organisation, it's one wait list. So they don't have to go in through 5 or 6 different doors. It's a common wait list now. So that is fantastic for people, because, people were going around to all different organisations, spending a lot of time applying and then updating information. And this also, and so it enables an easy application process, but it also creates a fairer wait time.
That's
So,
awesome. I
somebody
didn't
that's
know that.
applying for,
Yeah, that's really
yeah,
interesting. So for the audience listening, what was the name of that list, the common list again?
Pathways.
Pathways. And so if
Pathways.
do you have to be consciously putting yourself on the pathways list, or if you come by default to home in place, you'll put them on the pathways list?
Absolutely. So whether
Okay.
they come to home in place, whether they go to Homes New South Wales, whether they go to another community housing provider, once they make that application, they are on that common wait list.
That's awesome. That's really innovative. How long has that been in place?
Oh, hey, look, I'm guessing, and time goes so fast, but it must be, you know, 8, 10 years, could be
Okay.
longer.
All right.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's been a while, but I recall the days when people had to go and make applications to all different organisations. So
That's good knowledge. Is again like one of the barriers is knowledge. So it's good for people to convey that. I'm sure you do. That's good for me to know. So if we think about disability in particular and accessible housing options, whether it be someone's in a wheelchair, the doors need to be wider, the bathroom needs to be a certain way. One of the barriers can be that you need the housing, and you're so desperate for it, but it might lead to unsuitable living arrangements. When you think about your existing housing stock, all the units, all the houses you've got just internally, how does home in place address that barrier? Like, if you've got a house, it's 3 bedrooms, and you go, right, we need to give it to Bob, but we need to upgrade the bathroom. Like, how do you tackle that? How do you approach upgrading existing stock of houses?
yeah, so I guess there's various uh I guess programs. So you're well aware of the SDA housing model. And then there's also the community housing and social housing um, that you don't require NDIS to be eligible, or you could have NDIS for supports only and not
Yes.
for housing.
Yes.
Or you may not even have NDIS and although you have a disability.
Yep.
So that falls under, so social housing in general is Homes New South Wales stock
Yep.
and community housing stock, but community housing providers refer to their housing generally as community housing.
Can I ask a question?
Um,
Sorry to interrupt. What's the difference between community housing and social housing?
there's not, and this is where you'll see there's some terminology that you'll see, and you'll hear some people say social housing or
Yep.
community housing. I guess, well, sorry, there is a difference. Social housing also includes stock that Homes New South Wales
Okay.
own and manage.
Yep.
Community housing is managed properties for Homes New South Wales or homes that they own themselves, and it's community housing. So their social housing encompasses Homes New South Wales and the other states, as well as community housing providers, but community housing is specific to community housing providers.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the distinction. Right. Okay. Okay. Cool. And as you were saying, you were going along the distinction of, yes, some houses are specialist disability accommodations. Some are, you don't need that, but you need a support worker or a psychiatrist or whatever else. Yeah. So it does depend, doesn't it? Like, yeah, from an SDA point of view, that's a very formal. If you do an upgrade rather than a fresh new build, I get that needs to meet those specifications. But
Absolutely.
but equally there can be supported independent living houses where someone's got a SIL budget, but absolutely not SDA, but they still need the shower in a certain way, for example, the steps to be flat or no steps, unequal access. There's so many different variations. So I guess it is the answer to that question. It depends what specs you're needing to adhere to, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think like if you consider things like, there's a range of different housing stock, and social housing, community housing, some of that stock is fairly old. Some of it's 40, 50-year old stock. And that stock would require considerable modifications. What is being built and funded through governments these days, generally most tenders, and this varies within state and federal, most state governments and federal governments will request a minimum number of either silver or gold standard within new developments. So that provides, some accessibility, and obviously the higher standard you go, you're providing more accessible housing for
Yep.
disabilities. So
Yes.
that's where the new stock comes in. And obviously it's not all stock.
Yep.
Whilst I think governments and community housing providers try to create as many new homes with silver, gold level as possible,
Yep.
there's still some properties that don't meet that. And as you can imagine too, there's additional costs in that. So you can't have all stock everywhere continually going to platinum levels and things like that. So
Yeah.
that's one of the barriers, is the cost. But then the old stock modifications are required. And we have various different programs. So under SDA, we also manage stock for Homes New South Wales, and they're the old legacy housing type of stock. Predominantly, they are group homes,
Yep.
and they are older. There are some newer properties within that, and Homes New South Wales do provide some funding in terms of modifications and upgrades and things like that to those properties.
Exactly. And of course, we have to remember that housing generally is not just about disability either. We've got various cohorts. It could be drug and alcohol related. It could be various socioeconomic factors. There could be domestic violence. There could be lots of various reasons that you need housing, right? So just out of interest, like broad stroke, within home in place, what percentage are those with disability versus other cohorts, roughly?
Look, we have a broad range. So, and disability, disability is very broad.
Yes.
Disability, as you very well know, could be quite minor to very, very high needs. And as you can imagine, people living in social housing, there is a high percentage of people on the disability pension and are unable to work for various reasons. But the spectrum of that disability is very, very, very broad.
Yes, exactly. Okay, if we go futuristic for a second, and the future maybe is now already. When we talk about things like 3D printing of houses and prefabrication, what do you see that where does that fit in to the development pipeline, and what are the benefits of them and cons?
Yeah, look, in terms of 3D printing, I've only seen some stuff recently online. I've seen some videos. I've never seen or touched a 3D printed home or any type of construction. But very, very interesting. And I think with the housing crisis, these technologies can absolutely assist in meeting the demand for additional housing. And the obvious benefits for these technologies is time and money. So modular housing provides a cost-effective and time-efficient alternative to traditional building methods, estimated roughly around 20% faster completion than traditional. And the cost is obviously also lower. And there's also further savings on construction finance within modular construction. So, however, I think, there's these innovative building technologies are becoming more and more recognised now. Homes New South Wales has actually committed $10 million to do 5 small demonstration projects. So they're underway now. And I think that is probably going to be quite helpful in terms of the sector. Probably because I think that their keen interest is in relation to, that faster turnaround time, the build time, the delivery time, and the cost effectiveness of it. I think, though, there will always be a place for traditional construction. We're always going to need traditional construction. I think there's still some unknowns with prefab in terms of quality. There's still a lot of products coming to the market that have not yet been tested over a longer period of time. So we were looking at a project recently, and we costed it both on modular and traditional construction. And we had valuations done, and I spoke to the valuer and said, look, can you give me an idea at the end of a 25-year period, what would the valuation be on modular compared to traditional? And the response I had, which I was expecting, was, look, we don't have the evidence as yet. It definitely will be valued lower. We know that it will be valued lower, but they don't have the evidence yet to actually put that in writing and give an actual figure, was the response that I had from that valuer, which is a pretty large valuer in Australia.
That makes sense. That makes so much sense. I mean, but I suppose also then it comes down to the objective, right? So you kind of, right. So if you've got a quality issue, let's say if there is a quality issue, let's say in 30, 40 years time, you've got to rebuild the bloody thing. That's annoying and inconvenient. But if it's good enough and it can last, but the value is a bit lower, but it solves the crisis, so to speak, then of course there could still be value in that, couldn't there? Because of potential.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. There is a value in both. And that's why I feel, there's a place for prefab, modular, tiny homes, all the different little innovations that are coming out, a place for all of them. And there will always be a place for traditional construction as well.
Yes.
And I think one of the areas that we need to concentrate on in Australia is obviously enabling more apprenticeships, creating more trades, because that's one of the big hurdles in construction currently, is the lack of available trade. So, with COVID, we had the lack of materials, and then the lack of trades. There's still some issues with some materials, but not to the extent it was. That's probably the minor issue. The major issue in construction now is available trades. And it's quite volatile. We're seeing, different construction companies over Australia facing, unfortunately, financial issues. And we need to make sure that Australia has a strong construction industry, that it's viable, and because it provides economic stimulus in Australia. So it is really, really important sector.
It sounds like it's going to necessarily be a blend, though, right? Because you're talking about policy level, workforce level, probably immigration requirements for skilled plumbers and sparkies and woodworkers. That's all necessary, but that has a time lag, right? So it sounds like it's going to be necessary to blend it. Like I've got a friend that imports from Poland and Germany, I think it is, and the quality is incredible. They can even do SDA robust to the extent of the walls, and
wow.
It can take a baseball bat, literally, because it's that robust. And think about a Polish winter. It's nothing compared to an Australian winter, and also that insulation can be amazing for saving money on air conditioning and all that stuff. So
absolutely,
yeah, it's an interesting one.
And I think that's part of it, isn't it? Is actually finding that product, because there's a lot of it still unknown here.
Yes,
and I know there's been some election promises in further looking into into this as well. And I think it's important, because if it is going to, let's say it's going to be, 10, 20% of new builds, who knows what the rate will be. I know there's estimations out there, and it could increase, but we're nowhere near that yet. But I think we're probably going to be heading in that direction with the housing crisis, to get some more homes on the ground.
Exactly.
But there does need to be some quality in assurance in relation to this. So, really good information on what is available to be brought in overseas, and testing them against one another. And I know one of the things the Building Commissioner is looking into as well is some of this prefabricated construction.
Yeah, exactly. That's really interesting. Coming back to the SDA thing and some of the older stock and the SDA group homes, etc. Because you're a large organization and you're for purpose, and if you needed to have an on-site shared support, for example, the 24/7 concierge style, NDIS provider doing that service, you've also got the core supports, the community access, that involves collaboration, basically. Like, you can be the SDA provider doing the housing side of things, but you need to know who's the on-site shared plus everything else you just said. How does Home in Place work for that? Do you do tenders? What's your process for involving NDIS providers? Like, how's the visibility on that kind of thing?
In terms of, so if we have SDA homes and we're looking for a SIL.
Yeah.
So yes, differently. So it depends on, I guess, it depends on the program. So with our SDA properties, we actually have a few different, programs within SDA. So we have the Homes New South Wales one that I spoke of that, we manage. We also manage a lot of SDA properties as a fee for service. So for institutional investors and private investors as well.
Oh, do you?
So,
Oh, that's interesting. And
yeah,
a lot of the private ones do that. Like, for example, Vera Living, they're a private organization and they bring in institutional money and kind of like and do like very professional big projects, etc. That's cool that you guys do that as well.
yeah. So, but we do that on a fee for service basis. And then I'm not sure if you're aware, do you recall the Hunter residences where it was the closure of Tomaree and Stockton institutional centres?
I've heard of the history, but just for the benefit of the audience, like, would you allude to that? Like, because there's the interesting history there, isn't there? Yeah.
Yeah, so we actually one of the chips involved in that one. It was the first. So the closure of Stockton and Tomaree was the first, and we partnered with another community housing organisation, Blue Chip, and basically we delivered 64 new homes, and they're on 64 sites, but they're a mix of some sites have a 3-bedder and a 2-bedder, some have 4, some have 5. So it's a bit of a mixture of property types. So we actually transitioned the residents that were in Stockton and Tomaree into these homes so they could be part of the community. And that's fabulous, right? Who would want to live in an institution for the rest of their life? The supports are now in place, and these people now have and now are living as part of the community, engaged with other people, and living in homes, which has been lovely to see that evolution. But in relation to that, that was a tender with government that we applied for and were awarded with Blue Chip, and we created Home for Life is the organisation that we created together. And then we did tender for seals in relation to that.
Correct.
So, yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
So that was through a tender process. But then, we have fee for service in various states. So Victoria, Queensland, New South Wales, a little bit in ACT, as I said, they're for different types of investors, some small, some larger. And some, we have a lot of relationships, as you can imagine, with a lot of varied seals, and some of them are located in different areas. So some institutional investors may have seals also that they prefer, or that, that they work with, and there's also the ones that we already have relationships with and engaged with in those as well. So I guess it's different for the different type of programs that we manage.
And it's at scale. I think it's important to recognise that, because, for example, I've worked with Achieve Australia, and Achieve Australia in Sydney as a footprint, as they collaborate with their kind of partner organisation of Independent Houses Australia, right? So they've got also some of the former institutional stock that are now making into homes, kind of thing. And it's beautiful. I've seen some lovely stories there too, where literally the gates used to be closed and now they're not, and they've transformed the houses, and it's a much nicer environment to be in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is lovely to see. So I suppose like there's a whole, like, again, there's the ex institution thing, there's new projects in SDA, there's converting your existing stock. SDA in itself is a behemoth, it's a huge thing, right? One of the innovative areas I'd love to just explore now conversationally is think non-SDA for a second, and think supported independent living, right? Like, I know of some other housing organizations that do have some, I don't know if there are older deals, older arrangements, whatever, but they've got some group homes, and those homes might be a 3, 4, 5-bedder, and it fits the SIL model perfectly, where the housing organization basically is the landlord to the person with disability, and then the SIL provider can just concentrate on doing the service without having to basically have the tenancy risk and all of the stuff around that. And I find that model intriguing, right? Because for two reasons. If you think about it, there must be so much stock that's not a single bed unit dwelling, and doesn't require families to live with them, and it could be, in theory, maybe a group home because it's a 3, 4-bedroom, 5-bedroom house, but it's not. Maybe it's only getting used in a non-efficient way, if that makes sense, right? So
Yeah.
imagine a world where all of a sudden we go, well, why don't we take this stock and make it into a group home and do that kind of arrangement where you guys get to make your stock more efficient, so to speak, in terms of your actual buildings, with more tenants in there, but in a genuine way, and then collaborate with SIL providers, because again, it's non-SDA, it's supported independent living only. And the SIL provider gets to concentrate on what they're best at, which is the service without as much financial risk. Because the truth is that, in my opinion, the SIL model is kind of broken in two ways. You've got the housing risk, because typically they're either buying or renting and subletting houses but making a loss, and so they've got the vacancy problem and the risk that they bear there. And a lot of SIL providers go under financially because it's a lot of weight to bear. And then you've got the ratio risk, right? So I just wonder about, is there a world where there could be I don't know, a more enlightened collaborative approach, where we get to separate the risks out a little bit and go, housing's housing and SIL is SIL, and you just have to deal with your
Yeah.
ratio risk instead of the housing risk as well. Just a thought. I don't want to see what you thought about that.
Yeah, look, no, absolutely. And there's a few factors in relation to that.
Yes.
So the biggest piece of the puzzle in any housing is
Mm.
a lack of funding, right? So, you know, the housing shortage is huge and can constantly growing. You know, there's over 170,000 people on the waiting list in Australia. And the investment is just not keeping up with the demand. And this is not just in social housing, this is in the housing crisis is obviously a very, very broad issue. But you can see, you know, the lack of housing stock is one of the big issues, and that's in disability housing, and it's also in social housing, it's in market rentals, it's in home ownership. Home ownership's declining, you know, that puts more emphasis then on market rentals. Market rents, as we've seen, keep continuing to go up. They've gone up about 40% in 3 years. I mean, that's just crazy. That increases the need for working people to obtain affordable housing, and there's just not enough affordable housing stock. And then obviously it also then puts pressure on social housing. More and more people are needing social housing. So that housing continuum is struggling the whole way through. So I think it definitely, in terms of the model you're talking about, it does exist. There are models of it that it does exist, and it could exist more, but we need more homes. We absolutely need more homes, and that is the biggest struggle for all housing at the moment, as I said, across the whole continuum.
Yes.
So, but in terms of that model, we have a few examples of that I can share as well. In 2014, we delivered a project. Now, this was funded through federal government, and it was called SAFE, the Supported Accommodation Innovation Fund. Obviously, once the tender came out before they were built, it was just around the time NDIS was getting spoken about, you know, but not in. So this didn't come with SDA funding. This was capital funding from federal government, and we partnered with a SIL in relation to this. So we went in collaboration for this tender together. And what we done is we built 20 new homes. They were across 10 sites. So there was two-bed townhouses or two-bed single homes on each site. And they had the access to them was on either side. So people still felt like they were living independently, but they had the supports. And how this model worked, it's the keyring model. So basically, the properties are located very close within each other. So the SIL didn't need to be there 24/7 and could actually visit all of those homes without having those high operating costs. And also, if there was somebody that had a need, they're only, you know, down the road at another home. So that model has worked really well for us. So we finished the construction that in 2014. That model has worked extremely well. But obviously, again, it was funded. You know, any of these housing projects do require funding. And look, I think realistically there is potential for state and federal governments to try to collaborate and work together. in terms of the funding, because there is some of the old state legacy housing stock that are group homes. That's another model that we do have SILs involved in. So basically, but the legacy ones we have, they do have SDA that come along with those.
Yes.
And I think where you're trying to get to is, what about the ones that don't have SDA? Is that
exactly? It's the existing stock. Yeah, I totally agree with you. We need more housing. But again, imagine if it was a strategic objective amongst the various housing organisations plus state government, and if it was on the same page that this is an objective, and all you have to do, I'm grossly simplifying now, but all you have to do is review all your 3, 4, 5 bedroom houses and go, wait a minute, they've all got one tenant in, and that one could just be made into a group home way more easy. It's the squeezing more out of the juice out of the orange, basically. Yeah. That's the idea,
And look, just to respond to that, there's actually a lot of the new stock now that's built is 1 and 2 beds, and that's not just SDA, that's general housing.
Yep.
So we in Australia have seen incredible change in single occupant households. Now that's through people choosing to live by themselves, it's through separation, it's through the aging population. Whereas, the housing stock that was built 40 years ago were the 3, 4, and even 5 bedroom homes. So what is interesting is the government has their commitments to fund housing has pushed to more of the 1 and 2 bedroom housing stock to ensure that we have diversified stock in community housing, basically. So we did not have occupants living 1 bedroom in a 3 or 4 bedroom. So it's interesting that a large percentage of our stock prior was 3, 4 bedrooms and some 5s. And now with the investment in housing and what we've created and delivered ourselves and developed over the last 15 years, we now have, a pretty good balance of half 1s and 2s and 3 and 4s and some 5s. But what is interesting is there is still a need for, the 4 and 5 bedroom homes for families. So even in community housing, there's a huge need for some of that stock. So the demand is quite strong across all size homes. And what we're seeing too now is some of the temporary accommodation that's provided to people facing homelessness. When there's families, they're stuck in these little hotel rooms and if they're a large family, it could be across a couple of rooms, or they're all together in one room waiting for a home to go into. So it comes back to consistently the need and funding, the need and the funding. But in terms of there are group homes, as I said, that are utilised through SDA. Some of that stock could be refurbished. Some of it doesn't need to be refurbished. Some of it could be redeveloped. Some of it could even have, smaller stock put on the back of them to create more homes. So this we've actually had a discussion with the SIL in regard to this, is how can they get more homes in relation to for disability housing that isn't SDA. So it is a discussion that I think is starting to happen within the sector, and an important discussion, obviously. But again, I think, there is potential there to go, okay, well, could potentially federal government and state governments work together and go, okay, well, we'll actually, federal government may be able to fund SDA properties on some of the existing state sites and guarantee that funding long term, so that's there and they can be redeveloped. And there could be some other sites that are used for non-SDA funding, but I think there could be some collaboration into how that could work more effectively to create more housing stock.
Yes, exactly.
Both for SDA and non-SDA.
Correct, exactly. Because SDA, out of more than 600,000 NDIS participants, there might be 30 or 40,000. I think less, is about 35-ish thousand now, that have either SIL and or SDA, but they never quite disclose which ones have got either both or just one. So the SDA pool is like the microcosm niche of people with complex physical disabilities. But I'd say overall, the SIL non-SDA stuff is a bigger proportion, right? So it's just interesting amongst the economic challenges and narrow margins and this and that. And like, for example, it's only one example. So I'm not saying it's a macro trend, but one guy that was helping out as well to get access with Homes New South Wales, he had a 3-bedroom house all to himself. And yes, he would hoard, and it was in quite a state. But putting it simply, it would just need a hoarding specialist to come round, having a deep forensic clean, fix the tiles in the bathroom, and all of a sudden, boom, you got a 3-bedroom SIL house. If you take that
Yeah.
lens, right? It's just an interesting one. Let's go to the SDA thing for a second. Yeah, some of the organisations in Sydney and other cities have done some really innovative models where I've even seen it where during COVID, you had a student crisis, right? In terms of no students were coming into the country. And some providers would literally go to the universities and go, I'll take that whole apartment block that's got, 50 students in it. And that might just about match the SDA entry grade stuff to have basically studio apartments, right? And it's brilliant because it gives a home for the person, but it's also enlightened because you can have a roster of care for the whole building. You might have 10 apartments, 20 apartments, and you can have, support workers literally going to different apartments and different floors. Everyone gets their own unit. And you get people sometimes off the street out of homelessness. In that particular model, what do you think of that in terms of the city, the CBD, scene and the high rises, the individual units in the SDA context? Do you have any comments on that at all?
I think, look, it's coming back to that discussion on choice, isn't it?
Yes.
That's where the discussion's coming back to. So I guess in relation to the SIL, that's kind of like a key ring model, but it's actually all in one place. So it's not even within close proximity. But that is, I guess, the methodology is to try to reduce those operational costs and still be able to provide those supports at the same time. So I think there's merit in that, absolutely. And a big part of the question today is coming back to what type of housing do people want to live in? And that is different for everybody. And I think, we're seeing more and more, some people want to live alone. Some people want to live with their partner or their families or a friend. And I know out of the review undertaken under the commission and there's a statement in there and goals in there to close group homes down in the next 15 years.
Is there? It's interesting
yes.
because again, gosh, you're right, because all those things have to be honored, right? You got to honor choice, right? So you got to everything you just said, perfect. I totally agree. But also,
Yeah,
when it comes to the SIL model, well, that is group homes. That's the only bloody way that SIL is going to work because of the funding. It's quite. Oh God, it's kind of confronting. All group homes
it is.
shut down. But I suppose it's what do you mean by that? Is it just the ex-institutional stop things? Is that what they mean by that, or is it the whole model? In terms of the way that SIL providers are privately, implementing that. What's your interpretation of the statement?
Yeah, look, they have got it. They've got it in their report, and there's a goal,
Yeah.
and the statement. I get where they're going. It is around more choice, right? It is absolutely around choice. So supporting that people need to have that choice. But the report under the Royal Commission basically said that the governments need to develop and implement a roadmap to phase out group homes within the next 15 years. So whilst I agree there needs to be housing choice and a range of 1, 2, 3-bedroom homes, I still believe that some people would prefer to live in a group home because they may not have family, etc., to live with, and they like that company. True. I think, though, probably what we will see change is some of those group homes, and we are seeing some of it now, is depending on the disability, obviously the higher level of needs, it's harder to live with 4 other people. So we might see the newer group homes reduced to, 3 residents perhaps. And there may be some that are larger and some smaller. But it does come back into, you're right, it's coming into the operational costs. So again, either a keyring model or getting the most out of those homes. But then also, how do you then give everybody a choice? How do we make sure that they know, look, you don't have to live in this 4 or 5 bedroom group home. You could live in this 2 bedroom one down the road. So there's still a long way, I think, that we've got to go in terms of allowing that individual choice. So even though it's allowed there, I think there's some structural issues behind some of this, and funding issues, and all of the different ranges of things, and financial issues that don't allow this in broadly across for everybody under SDA.
Yeah.
And I think that's that also depends on, again, the level of disability.
Yes.
Someone could be quite comfortably making decisions on their own and know that they want to live by themselves, or know that they want to live with their partner or their family. And, there's others that don't have the capacity and the understanding to really make that choice.
Correct. I mean, what I'm getting from this conversation is the cross intersectionality of different sectors of government and also organisations, right? So, in that example of, should we get rid of group homes? If we got rid of group homes, there would be a huge implication on the SIL funding that's required to do one-on-one supports, for example. It does depend on the model. Like, I love the duplex kind of, we're all close together, single units model. That's beautiful. But there wouldn't probably be enough space to kind of turn that on quick enough. That would be a gradual growth thing. So the operational implication. There's also OH&S. Like if I've got someone in a group home environment, the NDIS typically for 2 to 1, where you've got 2 support workers, 1 person with disability, that typically is funded for, let's say, 6 hours a day max. They never really typically fund it for 24/7. So again, that's an example of, like, if I've got 4 people that require 2 to 1 support, well, actually, I kind of have to put them in that one group home environment. Otherwise, there's an OH&S problem to physically safely help them out with when they need it. You need those support workers shared, for that manual transferring aspect, hoisting side of things, right? So either way, there's intersectionality between the housing problem, but how do you actually run it as a SIL provider, and vice versa? And my one hope is that those conversations are happening at the state and federal level and within the scheme, but also at the housing. This is, I guess, one of the reasons I wanted to have this podcast today, just to kind of tap into your brain about what's happening and where you see things going. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, it is. And I think, there's a lot of need here, to, I think, make things a bit easier for investors as well. So one of the issues that the whole sector is very, very clear on is there's just not enough information on where the demand is. So, one of the significant barriers is the lack of accessible SDA market data to inform appropriate investment in the right building types and locations to meet the demand. So, we see some serious oversupply in some areas and undersupply in others.
Yes.
And obviously the oversupply results in significant vacancy rates with poor returns for investors, and then it turns investors away, from the SDA market. So we do need to make sure that we have clear data. And I know, look, the NDIS website has some data on there, but I think it's really important for us to also look at future data. So, for instance, when sites are acquired and there's planning undertaken, etc., for SDA property coming online, the other developers, etc., that are doing this, or investors, don't know the other ones. They only know of the existing things that may or may not be there.
Yes.
So, but you can see it at the moment. I think, for instance, Victoria has an influx of SDA construction happening at the moment, and if that creates an oversupply,
Mhm.
the investors are going to lose out, right? So that's going to be an issue. And then that will then in turn make this sector less attractive to investors to create the housing stock that we need. And there's
Totally
a
agree.
few different things within the investing in SDA.
Yep.
We're all aware there's been a lot of schemes out there, encouraging come and invest in
Yes.
SDA and you'll
Yes.
make $150,000 a year and you'll become rich overnight. And,
Yep. Yep.
we've all seen and heard those things. And unfortunately, that has happened a lot.
And it's
Um,
broken. It's broken.
yeah,
That I call it the mum and pop self managed super fund version, right? So I had Ian Jordan, the founder of Kinkera Community, SDA provider, on the podcast, and we talked about that very thing. And in our kind of mutual humble opinion, we thought, in a good way, there needs to be kind of a moving away from that. I hope that the market privately realizes that that was a bit scammy, and that the promises were too high. But what I'm getting from this conversation, and I want to ask you this, is because of the oversupply risk, even with institutional investors and proper large organizations like yourselves, there's still that risk because there's not the collaborative factor. So all you do is you go, oh, Liverpool, New South Wales, let's build there. Victoria CBD, let's build there. And then you go, oh, wait a minute, bugger, they're building one too. And you're wrecked because it's only later on you realize it. So this is a thought out loud. Would it be more enlightened for the government to do a tender process through bigger organizations and then attract institutional money that way? Because then you can coordinate.
Yeah, and my thought on this, so I think there's two things, and I think these are two very important things that should be considered. So one is we need to have really detailed information on the demand. As I said, locational, property size, 1, 2, 3 bedroom, and also the SDA design categories. Also with these investors, they're told go and build to the highest level. And we all know, in fact, the demand is actually not for those higher levels. It's that's just another promise that's being made. And obviously the robust and high physical support cost a lot more to build as well. But then they're actually only being funded for improved livability or fully accessible. So, those type of issues. But if there was, a clear information on the demand for the future as well, that would be one issue. So people could actually really consider this. But the other thought I had it's similar to yours. I actually think there needs to be a long-term commitment or guarantee from government in SDA funding, and that could be through a tender. Because again, you could imagine, if in 5 years there's a change in government or a change in policy and the funding's changed, there's no guarantee for these investors. So there's no guarantee. And so the construction costs a lot more to build SDA. But, if you need to sell an SDA property, you've got a very, very small market. So in terms of risk, it's a much higher significant risk for investors because they're paying more for the property, higher maintenance costs. But if they need to sell the property, they're probably going to lose capital, not gain capital, because it's a smaller market that is interested in that property. And the design of a lot of SDA properties isn't suitable for a general home. So there's significant risks in this term of market. And if governments could provide, a guarantee, then potentially that would reduce the risk significantly. So the way some of our tenders are working now is we are providing, instead of just capital upfront funding, community housing tenders. There's been some state ones, and a state one we were involved in, and now federal under the federal government under the HAF. It's basically like a 25-year guarantee. So you're funded monthly over 25 years under some of these, and some of it is different timeframes. But that would provide investors a guarantee that they've got a long enough funding that they can pay down that debt. And that funding will cover that debt, and it will encourage further investment. So, and with that, I agree. It would be then, I think the process could be that investors then apply to government for locations. So it may not necessarily, it could be under tenders at different times of the year, or it may just be a process that applications go in and they go into, the government and say, look, I'd like to develop, SGA housing in this location, or I'm not sure what location. And if government had a clear understanding on where that demand was going to be, they could say, yes, okay, well, if you build this property type, this size in this area, we'll guarantee your funding. And then we're going to eventually have the stock in the demand areas that are required to the level that is required, and have long-term investment
Yeah.
into estate housing.
Yep. Yep. I think that's it. That's spot on. Tender and guarantees. That makes so much sense. And we need to get we need to be less attractive to the cowboys, so to speak. Like, I'm sorry, but like you can't not know what you're doing and come in and do this and go, oh, it'll be all right, and I'll just become an SDA provider. Like, if you haven't done it before, you've got to be competent. Like,
Yeah,
I'm tired of incompetence in the industry with smaller providers that enter it for a money grab reason. It shouldn't be about that. You've got to be really good at what you do. It's fine to be an investor, as you're saying, and like work with organizations like Home in Place and whoever else. Like, that's fine. Be an investor and have it and look for a fair return. But my humble opinion is work with an existing SDA provider that knows what they're doing. Yeah, and then let them manage the
I
property.
agree.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Very good. Well, listen, look, I want to be respectful of your day because I know we're kind of coming up on an hour here, but thank you so much for the insight. This has been really fascinating. I've learned a lot about the differences of the various housing things, the challenges, and I appreciate your willingness to answer some of the tougher questions and like what should should be being done, so to speak. It's an interesting conversation to have. So yeah, really appreciate the time today.
No, and thank you for having me on. I appreciate being asked and to participate in this. It's been great.
Yeah, exactly. Brilliant. Well, listen, for those who want to find out about Home in Place, we will put the link to the website in the show notes below. So again, we've got Lyndall Robertshaw here on the show today, and my name's Chris Hall, your host. Like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff, and I look forward to seeing you all soon for a future episode. Thank you again, Lyndall.
Thanks, Chris.